everyone. We are live. We are live right now. It's good to see everybody. I'm Lord Dr. Jeremy. This is the king of all pharmacists, Greg Rybold, and our executive director, Monique Whitney, and this is PBM on the Rocks Live. You like that, Greg? I wrote that and recorded it. We don't have license to any music, so I just do it. We're going in. Greg and Basil or Matt and Basil will be joining us whenever they pop on. We're going to go on. Go ahead. Oh, there's Matt.
I'm sorry.
Welcome, Matt.
I'm sorry about that. I had a number of different Zoom links for some reason, and I finally found the right one.
Oh, yeah, my bad. I thought I sent the right one. But yeah, we do this through StreamYard. It's good to see you, brother. Good to finally actually talk to you.
Hey, guys. How are you?
Hey, doing good.
Hey, Matt.
How's it going?
We are
Basil's going to join us too here soon. At least he's supposed to. But yeah, we've got a lot to talk about right now. It's been quite the few months at this point leading up, and this FTC report dropped, the interim report, and there's just so much going on, and it's amazing because these are things we've been screaming about for ages. And we've had reports come out from our people, and we've had 3-Axis drop their stuff, and it's gotten a lot of play. But the FTC came out and officially said something about all these abuses going on, and that has gotten a lot more attention. And Matt, you follow this stuff closer than I do. I got into all the antitrust stuff just being an advocate in pharmacy. That's how I got turned on to you and your work. What is your feeling on the mood of everything going on with the FTC report?
Yeah, it's funny. So I was a blogger for some time. I'll just tell you why this matters. And it's a really dumb reason, but it's an important one. So, and it's kind of a lesson about politics that I didn't understand for a while. So I was a blogger, right? And I wrote about stuff that was going on in politics and in certain areas of policy back in mid-2000s, because I'm old. And I came to Congress. Became a congressional staffer in 2009, and all of these people who never cared what I said or wrote, because I was as a blogger, all of a sudden they were like, "Well, he's a congressional staffer. He must know what he's talking about, right? Because he has a business card and wears a suit and has some sort of authority." And it was so dumb. It was so stupid because I wasn't any different. But people thought, wow, he must know something because he has authority. And so it's when there are all sorts of ways to discount the things that you guys say, right? Because, you don't know what you're talking about. You're just pharmacists talking your book.
Oh, yeah. We were gaslit for years by health economists.
Absolutely. And the people, the FTC staff who've been dealing with this for a long time have been saying, oh, no, this is all silly. This is all very efficient. You guys don't know what you're talking about. And that makes that to people who don't know anything about your world, and that's most people, you have to just use shortcuts. What I realized about authorities in many ways, it's a shortcut. So people know who to trust in all of the different complicated areas that make up life, right?
Yeah, it's like political identification. You outsource your political thoughts and you let your political party kind of guide where you're going because that's easier, and that's what people do.
Yeah, you can't know everything about everything. We're pattern recognition animals, right? So when the FTC comes out and says, actually, everything that we've been saying for the last 25 years is wrong, because that is the subtext of the report. And actually, not the subtext, they said it.
Yeah,
they were clear about it. And all those weirdos were correct. Then a lot of different people in policy world who reference the FTC, that's their crutch, that's their pattern recognition vehicle. It flips all of these other areas, right? And there's a couple of other agencies that will have this effect, right? So you guys know the Trump rule on rebates, right? That he put out, and that then got withdrawn. And so
we actually did language for that executive order. We advised on some of that. We were psyched about it, and then it was oh, too bad. Yeah. There was so much more that was going to happen. And then it just like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. We'll wait till after the election. I was like, of course you will.
Right. Okay. So what happens is there's this part of Congress called the Congressional Budget Office. And you probably hear a lot about the budget deficit. The budget deficit. The budget deficit is so big. Oh, no, it's terrible. We've got to pass bills that close the budget deficit. This is a really big deal. And to most people, that sounds kind of right. Like, oh, there's like so much debt. Debt's kind of bad. When I owe money is bad, right? We can get into why that's like a really stupid view, because it's like you say, oh, the budget deficit is terrible, but also buy a treasury bond. It's the safest thing there is. That's the same thing, right? So like whatever. But also most debt is stuff that the government owes to the government. But whatever, we get away from that. The way that you choose that Congress understands whether a bill increases or lowers the deficit is complicated, because you're ultimately projecting the future. And so if you say, oh, we're going to raise taxes here, you might think that's going to bring in more money. But sometimes they would say, but actually, then people are going to do less of the thing that you taxed, and so it's going to bring in less money. Or you cut spending here, same thing, right? Like every rulemaking, will have some sort of change to revenue, but you need someone to project that. And so for Congress, that would be the Congressional Budget Office. They have a bunch of annoying nerds who sit there and churn through their models that say whether something is going to increase the deficit or lower the deficit. And since the PBM...
And they're all being advised by payer industry shills.
They're just economists, right? That's the definition of economists. It's like astrologers who are, owned by big money, right?
Yes.
And so the rebate rule, right, which you guys know would save everyone money except PBMs, right, including the government. They calculated that because they think that secret rebates are efficient, right? They love price discrimination because they're idiots and they're nerds. They were like, oh, well, that's efficient. That will change the amount of money that the government has to, if you put the rule into effect, it will get rid of this efficient practice, and then the government will have to pay more money. So that will increase the deficit. Okay. Now, whatever, you might think that's not a big deal because it's just Congress can ignore that if they want to. But Congress has all of these institutional arrangements where they say, well, in order to, if you want to pass something that will, spend money, which sometimes they do, or that will lower taxes, which sometimes they do, you have to make that deficit neutral. And that means you have to find something that you can repeal that will then account for the amount of money you want to spend through either tax cuts or increased spending. And guess what? If CBO says that this regulation will cost money, even though we know that's not true, then if you repeal the regulation or delay the regulation, then it's the equivalent of bringing in money. So then every year when they need what's called a pay for, which is, I want to spend money on like more post offices or whatever it is that I want to spend money on. Oh, I'll just delay this rule another year. Since it's baked into the budget, that's the equivalent of making money. And it's completely fake. It's completely artificial. And it's really stupid. Yeah. But if you can get to, the FTC came and they flipped a bunch of people's like switches. If you get the CBO to change and you get them to change their vision on price discrimination, you go to and you say your models are stupid. Look at what happened in Kentucky, right?
Yes.
Like, what is wrong with you? In fact, you guys should write a letter to them and say, look what happened in Kentucky, you idiots. If you can flip that, then you actually flip how Congress operates.
Yeah, and it feels like we gave the CBO a weapon in a lot of ways to offset spending by doing the exact opposite. And they continually do it. And
they do.
Greg, you know about this.
Yeah, they do. But it's so funny, Matt, that you bring up the rebate rule, because it's something, I don't want to get too nerdy on it, but it drives me crazy, because the CBO score was based on like a 15% presumption that was seemingly pulled out of the air. In that same CBO score, there was a footnote that said I'm paraphrasing, there may be some savings to seniors, right? And there was no number. If you go to the Medicare actuarial or the Medicare actuarial office, they had some projections. And essentially what got completely glossed over and was just not discussed at all as they're punching this rebate rule down the line is that there were, after everything, there was like $93 billion in savings for seniors at the counter. and the number wasn't even mentioned in the CBO score. Instead, what they emphasized is a presumption that was based on input from stakeholders, i.e., PBM interest groups.
So now what I'm going to say is going to be annoying, but if they had put that $93 million number in there, it wouldn't have mattered. Yeah. Sorry, 93 billion. It wouldn't have mattered because they only care about the budget deficit, which is government spending. So they don't care about you or your seniors.
Wouldn't have mattered for scoring, but optics is a very different thing, which is why they didn't put it in there, right? But
that's one thing we've been missing so much is optics in the pharmacy world, and that's why like so much is going on right now is we finally found like a message that's starting to resonate, and that's starting to affect people.
Can I curse on this or not?
Yo, fuck yes, you can curse. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so to take a step back, right? But for most of American history, really since I think the pharmacy associations really started in the 1870s, 1880s, right? And they were, they were the original kind of OG anti-monopolists. A lot of really important anti-monopoly rules were led by pharmacists and grocers and farmers. Why is it so hard to get that stuff through today?
We got very complacent. Like we used to have like NARD and we were badasses.
Okay, it's not your fault. Okay, or whatever. Fine, your fault. You feel guilty. Whatever. Yeah. I'm Jewish. I love guilt, so it's cool. Any of you Catholic?
No.
No. I just feel like there's a shame element to it. I think.
There is. You're right about that. There's a tendency for the pharmacist to say, "Oh, we should have seen this coming 30 years ago," and I always say the same thing, which is the level of thinking that got us here is as diabolical as the level of thinking that got us into the 2008 financial crisis. And Greg is holding up his
PBM's 101. It's a VHS cassette. That's how long community pharmacies have been ringing the bell about PBMs.
Right. So this is not, it's like you've been saying it, right? But why is it so difficult to get this through? And I can tell you that, pharmacists, if there's one error that I think pharmacists make, it's they think they're uniquely put upon, and it's like, no, everybody's getting screwed, and they're basically getting screwed not in exactly the same way, because I think the way you guys are getting screwed is more complicated and harder to describe, because you can't even be like, there are no prices. There's no.
Well, it has to be. I actually talked about this on Julie Bach's podcast right before this one. Yeah, it has to be, because what they're basically doing is saying, all right, well, we're going to screw over these small businesses and let patients die so that we can make more money. So they make it as complicated as possible to justify their existence.
Well, let me just sort of get to what I'm trying to say, which is that you talk to cattle ranchers, it's the same dynamic. Yeah. If you talk to people in Hollywood, it's the same dynamic. If you talk to whoever, mortgage bankers is the latest one. They're getting screwed by FICO and the credit bureaus. If you go across the economy, and Uber drivers, like chicken farmers, like you can find every group, right, is getting put upon in sort of the same way, which is that you have these middlemen that are doing it, right? And every single I can talk to people who create ETFs, right? They're getting screwed by, Charles Schwab. Like, and the thing that's interesting is that it's always the same. It's not the same thing, but it rhymes, right? It's always, they're getting screwed by price discrimination, secret rebates, and the economists always say this is good. And then you have someone at CBO that's like, this is good, right?
Yeah.
And what we're dealing with is a constitutional system, not constitutional in the way that people normally think about it, in the sense that there's an amendment in the Constitution that says X, Y, Z, but in the sense of like a normative institutional arrangement that structures how we can do things. So if you think about CBO was created in the 70s, like most bad things in America, created in the 70s. Look at architecture. I mean, I like disco, but you know what I mean, right? It was created along with a couple of other theories, one of which was the Federal Reserve independence. The Fed gets to make its own decisions, and they don't have to respond. They just are responsive to no elected leader. And we're like, oh, that's cool, because they're independent. They're just do what Wall Street wants, right? You have these really large, weird trade agreements that are kind of like all the global arguments about globalists are right. I mean, that's why we are in shortage with medicines that you guys see straight up. That argument was created in the 1970s and instrumentalized in the 80s and 90s. Then you have the way that antitrust was oriented entirely around economics, the consumer welfare standard, right? Same thing, something you're dealing with. That's why all the consolidation was efficient, right?
Economies
efficient,
of scale,
no,
synergy.
Exactly. We used to say that conflicts of interest were a problem. It's in the Bible. No man may serve two masters, right? We used to say that, hey, no one should have too much power, right? That's very basic stuff. Like those were the basics of American economic organization. And then in the 1970s and 80s, we were like, oh, conflicts of interest are fine. No conflict, there's no interest, right? Bigness is good, it's efficient. And these changes happen in a number of areas. And they created these institutional choke points, right? Where nominally Congress makes laws, and they do, but they have a CBO, because CBO is under the budget committees in Congress. I worked on the budget committee. And technically they work for the budget committee, but we work for them. I mean, when I worked there, I remember they used to, and they're a choke point over what Congress can do. And the Federal Reserve is a choke point on what the executive branch and Congress could do. The economists are a choke point over what antitrust enforcers can do. The economists are a choke point for what the regulators can do. All of these places where you have some democratic impulse to control how commerce works, you have economists inserted there to say, no, we're the adults with supervision, right? And that's the constitutional system that we're dealing with. And they have a lot of money, right? The bad guys have a lot of money and they have a lot of power, but they didn't have a lot of money and a lot of power when this started. But the economists got there first. This system was erected and then the money and power came later. So we get that backwards and we think, oh, they have a lot of money and power, that's why they're powerful. In fact, it was the ideas that got put in place first, and the money and power is now the residual part of it. And so now we're undercutting the intellectual foundations, and it's having all of these effects. And it's very powerful. It's very exciting. And hopefully, but now they have a lot of money and power, and we're gonna have to deal with that too. So that's kind of that's
the fight that we're in. Is they've got way more money and power. We're basically taking on European countries that exist in our own country by going at them, and we have an economy, and it's not just in healthcare, it's across multiple industries where you have so many middlemen that are sucking all of the value out of the people that are actually creating value, that they have to justify their existence and they have to use all the leverage that they have. We have an economy that is a house of cards in a lot of ways. And that's the way I've always seen it, because whenever you're not adding value to the system and you're gaining everything from the system, it can't continue.
You say that's funny. So this is a friend of mine who actually is an antitrust pharmaceutical lobbyist who told me, not lobbyist, a lawyer. And we were talking about Sam Bankman-Fried, right? The crypto scammer. Yeah. And we were talking about, why did this guy fool so many people, right? Because it was obvious that it was like the whole crypto thing was a scam, right? You look at it and you're like, yeah, this is not, it's like weirdo guys doing cocaine in Miami being like, this is the future. And you're like,
it was really fun to trade for a while though.
No, I know.
Not so much now.
No judgment, right? I think it's like, but it was obvious, I worked during the financial crisis. I saw what was going on. But what was interesting is like Business Week, Fortune, Brookings Institution, Harvard, all of these institutions, Larry Summers, they all validated Sam Bankman-Fried and these billionaires.
Larry Summers.
Right? So random people who didn't know any better, whatever, that's one thing. But people that are really sophisticated thinkers and knew and could look into it and knew or should have known better, embraced it. Why did they do that? And the reason is because the language that Sam Bankman-Fried was using is basically no different than the language that most CEOs use. And so the fact that he was sitting on top of an institution that was churning nothing and extracting from that really didn't look very different from any of the other CEOs that sit on top of institutions that churn and have something real, but they're just extracting. It's like the CEO of CVS, right? She sits on there and she's no different than Sam Bankman-Fried, except CVS happens to be a real entity with real assets, but it's just extractive, right? So that's kind of like when you say it's a house of cards, it is not totally a house of, I agree with you, but it's not totally a house of cards yet. Like there's a lot of real value in America, but we have this kind of predator class that's up top that don't do anything. They're just like, they are the ultimate welfare queens, right? They just extract and take, and they don't work for a living. I mean, and it's just, I don't know what to do about it. I mean, I do know what to do, break the monopolies and throw a bunch of them in jail, but like, that's where we are, right?
Guillotines. I got to be careful. I don't want to get kicked off Twitter again.
I don't know. I mean, guillotines, look, you deal with the left. They call for guillotines enough, and then they start turning on each other. And you could see how the French Revolution happened. So I'm kind of like, I'm not cool with that. I get it, but I'm not, I know where that leads. That's not a good.
Oh yeah, I know. Everyone it turns into a mess.
I don't want to be
Matt, I was going to ask you, especially with Greg on here, like RPA bringing back the Robinson-Patman Act, like how viable is that? Like you two are some of the best minds that I know when it comes to antitrust, and then Greg with pharmacy law. I actually dubbed Greg like king of the pharmacists.
Yeah.
Like, do you think that's going to be viable in the future?
Greg pushed a bunch of people off of a hill so that he could hit the pharmacist. Just to make that clear.
It's true. I respect this man. He shoves very hard.
Not even king of my household, right? But I'll take it, Jeremy. You're a good man.
You want to go, Greg? I don't.
Yeah, no, after you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? I mean, it's so but I think it's coming back. I mean, it definitely feels like the FTC. All the reporting is the FTC has some PBM stuff in the works on insulin. I don't know if they're going to use Robinson-Patman, but there is definitely a they're going to. I mean, it's on the books. They're going to find a way to use it. So I think it's going to come back. I mean, you always see a little bit of Robinson-Patman in private rights of action. So I think it'll be there if nowhere else.
Yeah, and I would say I think they're scrutinizing sort of all the tools in the tool chest at this point, right? They're looking at Sherman Act, they're looking at Robinson-Patman, Clayton Act. I'm a big proponent of them looking at the Section 5 of the FTC Act as well, unfair methods of competition. They dusted off and created some new policy guidelines there a couple of years ago, and I think they're going to be looking at all of those and looking for potential leverage points, right? I would say, from my perspective, I think it's easier to make sweeping generalizations and it's easy to kind of broadly condemn things. But when it gets down to the level of the litigators and the lawyers and they start looking, the word monopoly is thrown around really, really loosely, right? Well, is it a monopoly? Is it an oligopoly? How does it fit with the Sherman Act, et cetera? But I think that folks are taking a really close look. I'm a big fan of them looking at unfair trade practice under Section 5, unfair methods of competition, Section 5 of the FTC Act. I'd also love to see them re-scrutinize, retrospectively scrutinize some of these mergers. There was a period of time where all you had to do was say vertical increased efficiencies, and by God, the doors swung open, right? And I think you could look at some of those mega mergers between PBMs and insurers, in say 2018, that range, and go back and look at the data. And indeed, drug prices didn't go down, options didn't increase. What happened is drug prices went up and trade was restricted. And so, that's something we've been fighting for, the CVS Aetna merger in Georgia. We were, fighting that at the state level all those years ago, right? But I would love to see them come back and kind of retrospectively review some of these, massive mergers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I mean, and this gets us to the politics, right? And I'm going to sound partisan. I am partisan, but I'm not partisan because I like Democrats. I'm partisan because of the policy. I just follow policy. You have a problem where the Republicans are constantly trying to cut the funding of the FTC and the antitrust enforcers, and the Democrats are trying to expand it. And it's not all the Democrats and it's not all the Republicans. It's about 80% of the Democrats are trying to expand antitrust, expand funding, and 20% are trying to do the opposite. And then 80% of Republicans are trying to cut funding and withdraw authority, and 20% are doing the opposite. And then it's like JD Vance is one of the good ones, right? And he just got picked to be VP. My guess is Kamala Harris is one of the bad ones, and she got picked, she's VP. But we do have this problem where if you want to do those retrospective mergers, it's going to cost a lot of money, and there's no money for it, right? So, where is that going to come from? And I think that's a challenge that, I mean, you see this in lots of different areas. It's a big challenge. How do you get the Republicans to follow through on their aggressive and I think deserved rhetoric about PBMs, right? How do you do that? And there's this broader dynamic where a lot of the Republicans that I deal with, and I deal with Republicans all the time, and I like dealing with Republicans because they resent Democrats almost as much as I do. But they really do have this issue where they want, and this gets back to the ideas problem, right? They want increasingly they want stuff that a government does. Like they don't like big tech platforms censoring them. That's a very common view on their side. But they are very afraid of actually having a government. So that's the dynamic. Like they don't like what PBMs do. But when you start to say, okay, well, then this government agency should enforce this thing, then they get really nervous because they're like, oh, but we don't really want a government, right? And that's the dynamic that's on their side. And that is something that hasn't been fixed yet. And that's the political problem that we're dealing with. So until we can get that fixed, those mergers are not going to be undone.
Yes. I think the message that we have to send is you can't give an entity a kickback exemption and then expect them to not be regulated. They have a kickback exemption and they're vertically integrated. They can use that, and they have been using it as this huge fulcrum to just put pressure across the entire healthcare industry. And if you don't have some kind of oversight at that point, it's not a free market. Like the government can have a say. Like they can go on and about their free market economics, but this isn't free market economics. There's no actual competition. I think that may be the message that we need to send to Republicans, and it's something I've been playing around with to kind of get past that barrier. They've been traditional allies, but we've been hitting kind of some headwinds with them because of the Chamber of Commerce recently. And it's taken a lot to get Democrats turned around because they reflexively defend the ACA constantly, and it's really frustrating because that empowered all the bad actors in healthcare.
And they also love rebates, and they're super into PBMs, and they think PBMs, you know, they're at least the ones, they're the only, and they do a lot of bad things, but they hold down pharma prices at least. And it's like, and I tear my hair out, you know, because this isn't coming from like them being bought off. Like these are the like most ardent, you know, singing the international types who hate pharma. And they just don't know. They don't understand. They don't understand
the PBMs are making more on these drugs than pharma is a lot of times. Insulin, they were making a fortune on insulin for so long.
They also don't understand that if you force branded, like if you force companies that make branded drugs in the same class, if you force them to compete over price in the formulary, that will actually bring down prices. Right now they're competing not over bringing down prices, but over kickbacks. And so they just don't get that because they don't like competition as a general framework. They think competition is free market and they don't like markets, and they're all very confused. So it's like, but yeah, I mean, there's all of these challenging intellectual problems, but they are starting to get it. That's what's exciting because of your work. Like people actually know what PBM stands for on the Hill, which is exciting.
It was a long road getting there, let me tell you.
Oh, it was long.
Back in the day, I mean, you know, I often say this, that I started off doing PR for PUT before I became the executive director, and you couldn't get the words pharmacy benefit manager out of your mouth before the person was hanging up on you. They just didn't know, didn't want to know, and it was hard. Now they know, and they can't turn away, and that's good. But I would say, you know, in defense of anybody, regardless of their political party, about not really getting it, it's a lot. It's a lot to get, and it was intentionally designed to be complex like that. So, yeah.
My entire thing is we come in and we do everything that we do, and we could talk about bringing back RPA. We could what just happened? Okay, I'm sorry, that clicked a weird way. All right, we're back. We could talk about doing all these things and we can get people on our side, but whenever their lobby comes in and they can sideline everything because of the way our government is structured, they can introduce language that just completely guts a bill. They can go ahead and hold up something like we're seeing with
and they're artists
246. They're artists. They just go in and it's like we got one senator holding up a bill in North Carolina, Senator Berger. Fuck you, by the way, piece of shit. We're coming. He's holding up this bill in North Carolina, would pass unanimously all through. It passed unanimously in the House. It would pass unanimously in the Senate. He's holding it up because it's on his desk because, maybe he's using it as political leverage. But my entire message is we've got to make it more painful for them to do that than what anything else the PBMs can do and what PCMA can do. It's hard whenever the system is working against you, if that makes sense.
It is. And, Jeremy, one thing I'd say, and Monique, you've heard me say this, but pharmacists, particularly at the state level, have been better than almost any other industry group at passing massive legislation. Massive legislation. There are groups that have been trying to pass the same thing since 2010. And when you look at like state PBM code sections from 2015 to 2024, it is mind-boggling the evolution and the extent of PBM regulations and the PBM reform. And so I think pharmacists get some credit for that. I think state legislatures should get some credit for that. I think it proves to be a very, very different thing at the federal level, right? It's just in many ways, it's a different animal.
Yeah. And Greg, that's the things that people like you, like you're a genius with this stuff. And that's also why, like, when we come out and we speak in public and we confront senators in public and people listen, because we're not just like some randos. I mean, we're community leaders. We're, pillars of community. We see everyone all the time. They pay attention. And that's why, like, we're putting the PUD Action Network together in multiple states, because when we need to apply pressure, we need to apply pressure. Like, we're doing a good job, at least in some ways, at the state level, but we can do a better job because when it comes down to it, we got to fix it.
I mean, I think you guys also, you've done it. I agree, Greg. It's been astonishing to watch the progress you've made. There are a few movements like yours that have been able to do that. So, I mean, I think you've done, and I think it's exactly for the reason that you pointed out, which is, yes, community leaders and whatnot. There's also a broader there's broader American tradition that you're a part of, that you're helping to build. And that is the anti-monopoly tradition in general, right? And that is the tradition that says that secret rebates are un-American, right? And I think that's when you have a senator who's holding up a bill, right? And there are many different excuses, but that is their last line of defense. Like, they're going to lose that if it's just one senator holding up a bill. They will.
He's
eventually.
A very powerful senator.
Yeah, but they will eventually. Eventually,
Yeah.
they'll lose. You can break, if there's just a small number of people resisting, you can break them, and that's the dynamic in most of these states.
But our issue is they're running the clock out. Most of these
that's in
don't have
North
that
Carolina, but in are you talking about the federal level, or are you talking about a state level?
Both.
You're talking about very
everything
specific
they can.
Yeah, but you guys have gotten. I mean, just to speak broadly, in there have been many. If this were happening in every state, I would say, wow, we got to figure something out. But it's one battle you're losing in an overall campaign you're winning, right? There's lots of states that have passed impressive pieces of legislation, but I think the federal level is a different animal. And I don't have an answer there. We did pass some minor antitrust legislation, but we're going to have to, Chuck Schumer is extremely lazy and does not want to move anything ever.
Well, we're working on that.
Yeah.
Shout out New York pharmacists.
Yeah. He's really awful. But I think he also doesn't, there needs to be a generational shift in thinking. Like there needs to be a recognition, like when, there's a lot of different social issues, right? And Congress does move on them because they're like, oh, well, it would just be crazy not to. And when we're successful, it'll be the same thing. It'll be, oh, well, if there's a secret rebate, of course we have to change that. That would be weird not to, right? That's where we have to get to. And we're getting there.
So Matt, it's funny. I was reading your excellent piece this week, right, on the FTC interim report. And it's funny because as I was reading it, it reminded me, and what you just said sort of reminded me, but I started thinking about like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, right? Where it essentially compelled like industry-wide change. And are we close to that moment, right? Where the world has seen enough, policymakers have seen enough, And it's that moment, and
Yeah.
it's that time for change. But what I would say is pharmacy and really policymakers have to be really careful that it's real change and not symbolic change, right? Because these industries are so big and they're so complex that we have to get the policy right. But it feels like maybe I'm being overly optimistic. I'd love your thoughts. It feels like, boy, maybe we're close to that Upton Sinclair moment where action is just compelled.
Yeah, I mean, we are, and I don't think it's going to happen in one moment, right? So if you think about railroads, right, and there's this new thing that happens, and it's the 1870s. You're a farmer. You're like, oh my gosh, now this railroad, I have to deal with this new thing that's super powerful, and you get state laws passed, Granger laws, the Supreme Court, rules, and then eventually, in 1887, you move the Interstate Commerce Commission Act, or the Interstate Commerce Act, whatever. And in 1890, you get the Sherman Antitrust Act. And so you set up lots of state commissions. They don't quite work because their railroads go across borders. Then you do a federal commission, then they fight with the courts for a while. And there are, they don't really figure the problem out until the 1920s, right? And there's the Hepburn Act in 1906. Every single one of them takes a piece. They don't really totally understand this complicated system, and they keep learning about it. And eventually they make more rules, and then they get rid of the stupid ones. The courts make some dumb decisions, and then good decisions, and Congress learns. And eventually they get a hold of what the system should look like. And I think that's kind of where we are. I don't think we're not starting at the beginning. There are a bunch of rules to deal with PBMs already. There's a bunch of laws at a state level. You said starting in sort of 2014, there's a huge number of laws that sort of started getting passed. We're gonna put forward some, there's a lot every week or two. I see, some other court case that's ruling on something. So it's very clear that there will be legislative action on a federal level. I'm guessing that that the law that they pass is going to be kind of good and kind of stupid,
or it could be all good. Everyone tune into the Pet Summit next week.
That's right.
Yeah, well, anyway, go on, Matt.
Even if it's the law that you want, they're going to respond, right? In war, your enemy gets a vote, right? You don't. They're going to go to courts. They're going to challenge it in the Fifth Circuit. Who knows what the judges are going to say? It's not to say this is give you bad news, because that's not what I mean. I'm just saying they're relentless and we're relentless, and we're going to win this. But getting something over the line, changing the institutions, it will all help, right? And it will move us.
There's no finish line. They will be heard. They will answer back. No finish line to the fight. Yeah,
that's right. And they're gonna, this FTC report is a huge deal, right? When they bring the insulin case, it'll be a huge deal. It'll help all the other litigation that's going on, and that will help all of the state laws that are going on, or that'll help execute on them. And so, the cases against Google, the cases against Amazon, all of these cases, they are cumulative, right? So these things, the Robinson-Patman Act came out of the arguments about Robinson-Patman Act came out of our analysis of Amazon back in the early 2010s, the problems that booksellers were having. So it's a little bit like, how can we staunch the bleeding as much as possible until the legal changes take effect? That's kind of the way that I think about it. So I don't know. That's the general view. I wouldn't say they're gonna ask us. Just assume that parts of the law are going to be bad or stupid or problematic. Just assume that, right?
The Craig Litter Bryan's law of unintended political consequences. I always like to bring that up. He was one of my favorite professors. R.I.P. Dr. Bryan's. What is your all's opinion on the Chevron deference? Because I see a ton of stuff go back and forth all the time on it about the FTC and maybe going to HHS, and we don't know where the authority's coming from as far as PBM rebates. I can't get a handle on it because everyone's telling me something different, and I will go out and just like I am, I will be very emotional and tweet something very, very hard on a fact. And I don't know.
So there are a number of cases that the Supreme Court just heard that say essentially judges have more latitude to redefine laws. That's really it. And
Yeah.
it's extremely arbitrary. So I'm going to put on I'll be a fake lawyer for a second and a fake Supreme Court watcher. Before Chevron deference says that if a judge doesn't like a law, they have to use the term arbitrary and capricious to strike it down. When they repealed Chevron deference, they said that judges don't have to use the words arbitrary and capricious. Instead, they can say, I just think the law is bad.
Oh.
That's it. That's
So
all
like
it is.
little
The
kings.
judge can just use slightly different language to do the same thing they want to do.
Yeah. They pretty much weren't able to do that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Greg.
I was just gonna say, from a former, and it's been a long time since I've litigated anything, right? But from a former litigator's perspective, I think it's interesting, right? Because I do think it's going to encourage and potentially open up some additional challenges of sort of regulatory interpretations. And so and there are some bills out there right now that contemplate CMS promulgating rules to determine fair and reasonable contract terms, right? Chevron, the implication of this recent decision may encourage, some prescription drug plans or PBMs, were that ever to pass, to be a little more litigious, right? A little more challenging of that. So I think it's interesting. But I'd say this, when I look at some of the largest, sort of most problematic PBM practices in federal plans, so much of that was, and Monique, you hear me say this a lot, right? Regulatory capture, but
Yes.
so much of what problematic PBM practices, the way was, it was almost paved by CMS regulations. And so I'll give you just a really simple example. Medicare Part D, right? The US code says that the beneficiary, America's seniors, should get the benefit of any discounts that were negotiated. Right? Seems pretty simple, seems pretty unambiguous. Go back to 2012, 2014 range, and from industry input, right? Think PBMs and insurers. CMS promulgates a definition of negotiated price that basically says, hey, the patient gets the benefit of negotiated price concessions that can't be reasonably determined at the point of sale, right? Enter the world now where, in 2021, there was $50 billion in drug maker rebates that patients didn't get the benefit of. There were $12 billion in pharmacy DIR that patients didn't get the benefit of, right? And that was all sort of opened up, that pathway was opened up by CMS's regulatory definition of negotiated price. Similarly, the US code has any willing provider for Part D, right? But lo and behold, CMS regulations have done what? They've paved the way for preferred networks. They've paved the way for narrow networks. And so, I think that, the implications of that, we don't even know, right? We're speculating here, but they'll certainly spur more litigation. There'll be more challenges. But on the provider side, I think there will be times where maybe a little less deference on the agencies that are captured by some of these, monster corporations. I think it's going to open up some litigation opportunities for providers and as well.
I 100% agree with that. I'm sitting on the center left or whatever you want to call it, and people are trying to explain that Chevron deference, the removal of Chevron deference, is fascism or something. And it's like, have you ever dealt with the government?
Yeah.
It's a weird, complicated decision. And the idea that regulators always get things right, that you always defer to them, is, first of all, fictitious. It's not like Chevron deference really meant that much. But also, they get things wrong a lot. And so, okay, I mean, you're just trying to bear, like, it just feels to me like a lot of administrative lawyers need a reason to feel very strongly about something that is super boring.
Yeah.
I understand that. I mean, I'm in pharmacy advocacy, and it's very boring to most people, but I'm sitting here grinding.
No, but you're focused on something that's meaningful, right? So there's boring and meaningful, and what you do isn't boring. It's just complicated, right? I mean, you could just say like, oh, fantasy sports is boring, right? I don't think, but like some people love it, right? And it's just, It's no accounting for taste, am I right? But the point is that it matters, right? You don't waste your time on stupid bullshit. What I'm saying is a lot of the administrative law like discourse is stupid bullshit, right? Where they're trying to make arguments about things that they're punching at clouds. So I just wouldn't care that much about Chevron, except to agree with Greg that if there's a law that you think they're misinterpreting, like exactly that's a great example where they're just violating the law CMS is violating the law by letting these companies keep money that should be going to patients. That's a good place for litigation. And I would bring
my issue with it is that it feels like it's going to be a roadblock to anything the FTC may bring down the hammer on. It feels like it's going to be something that's always thrown up and more of a delay tactic. That's why I get annoyed with things like that.
But the Chevron deference, the FTC doesn't, sorry, not to be annoying about it, but Chevron deference,
no, it's fine.
FTC doesn't use Chevron deference, right? So the FTC put forward a rule on non-compete agreements recently, right? Saying non-compete agreements are banned. And they did that using their Section 5 authority and something in their Section 6, which said they can write rules. And they didn't ask for Chevron deference. And there's a court in Texas which struck it down and said, we just think the rule is arbitrary and capricious, which it would be struck down even if Chevron deference were still there. And there's a judge in Pennsylvania who's probably going to uphold the rule because she thinks that it's the plain reading of the statute says they have the ability to write rules. And that's just a...
Yes, but man, this is healthcare.
There's going to be all these other fake arguments from people saying, oh, this is a delegation of legislative power and non-delegate. All of it is just like kind of fake bullshit. That it's like all fake bullshit from people that just don't want any governance. And it's really irritating.
Man, this is the thing. This is healthcare. Like, it's not about being right. They're just trying to run clocks out at this point. They're just going to put legal challenges up. And while they're doing that, more of us die every day. And that was my issue with it. It's just like, okay, this gives them an excuse to try it. And of course, they'll throw it through something like the Fifth Circuit and it's going to go up and it's just going to go back and forth. Everything we try to do is constantly that way.
I have something optimistic, and I think a suggestion for strategy, which is I think that the selection of JD Vance is really good news.
That was good news. We actually celebrated that. Not to celebrate JD Vance too much, public, but that was better than a lot of the things we were thinking was going to happen on the antitrust side.
I think you're going to have somebody who forget about what he said about antitrust and just who he is and his people and where he came out of. He's very community oriented. He hates big corporations or thinks big corporations are out of control. And I think he's a very smart bureaucratic infighter. So this is the kind of person who would see, the financial interests that are backing him are not the big PBMs. So he doesn't have any reason. There's no conflict there. So I think he would see the value in this kind of fight. So I think that's somebody I think that's really good news, particularly for your fight. Not to say that I'm not saying anything praiseworthy about him in any other context in this moment.
Yes,
I just think he's very good for your fight.
All right, I have a question.
Hates him. Oh, go ahead, Monique.
Okay, it's all right. Because we're talking about this. The Trump administration was very good for our cause. Trump looks poised as of today to, come into office again.
Except for CVS Aetna. Remember that they let CVS Aetna through.
Right. Well, yeah, but
our official stance is Lena Khan needs to stay there no matter what.
Right. Yes. So I guess my question is this:
we love you, Lena.
We've heard Ted Cruz talk about the weaponization of the FTC.
Right.
And, I think that what the FTC is doing is really good because even with our fight, you look at what they're doing across the board, they're really getting back in the business of taking care of consumers and breaking down these corporations, right? What will happen in a Trump presidency, do you think? Do you think that the momentum will keep going? Do you think that they might slow that down? I mean, it is a fear for us seeing for the first time in, I don't know how many generations, we actually have an FTC that's interested in the fight and has a stomach for it, in every industry. What do you think will happen if a second Trump presidency happens?
I mean, it's Trump. Who knows, right? I mean, I don't know. I on the one hand, he was very good on PBMs, right, last time, and I could see him putting in some big pharma guy into HHS who just wants to ruin the PBM's day because
I would take that. I would take that.
Oh, I would love
Forget
that.
before we had rebates, drugs
Yeah.
were cheap. But
we all have to worship, bow down to Pfizer, and he just like steps on the neck of PBMs. I'm like, okay, works for me.
It was good.
I'm just trying to keep my people in business and alive at this point.
I mean, ultimately, we'd like to see them broken up, right? So Trump seems like the kind of guy that would not be, he would shy away from that.
I think that's right. I think he doesn't have any ideological reason. He doesn't care, right? Which is good. But I do think there's and also I think if he tries to do the breakup, a lot of the judges that he's appointed who are careerists are more likely to be like, oh yeah, okay, I don't want to offend Trump, right? Because I want to get up boosted to the Second Circuit or whatever it is, right? But I do think that the risk is that they are very friendly to the Medicare Advantage like payers, right? So Biden has been not as nice on the Medicare Advantage side, so he has not boosted. Like they asked for huge payment increases, and Biden has not done that. And Trump would, and Trump has wants to increase the amount that's going into Medicare Advantage, and those are the PBMs, right? So
yes,
will he increase the amount that they're making on Medicare Advantage and also go after PBMs? Yeah, he could do that. That would be consistent with what they did in the first term, but it's also possible that I think Trump this time is running as a very different candidate than he did in 2016. He's much less populist.
He will stay out of jail. Yeah, he will gladly take the money and do a lot of things.
Well, you can be. I'm not going to get to the allegations of corruption because I think that would be, that's one way to look at it, and it's a fair way to look at it, but also there's another way to look at it, which is to say that, he doesn't think he needs to be an economic populist to win. And he realized, like, he's building a coalition, which is sort of a much more of a traditional Republican coalition with the Chamber of Commerce and that type. And he's going to do some tariffs, and he's going to do some things that are different. But he has decided that that's a winning formula, and that would be a tragedy. That would really suck if he did that.
Populism's what it got him in there. Like, full disclosure, I voted for Trump the first time because I like populism in a lot of ways, and the Republicans, I lean very, very socially left, and I traditionally have supported, especially a lot of Republican candidates locally and more on a state level. I'm an independent in every single word, except I'm, not stupid like most independents. But I'm afraid that,
hey, as a populist, you can't call everyone stupid. If you're going to be,
I can.
I'm an independent, and I'm just going to act like I didn't hear him say that. So anyway,
yeah.
Carry on.
No, that your average independent voter just not so much stupid. They just don't keep up with things.
I'm a Democrat, but I'm a populist. And the thing is I really kind of had very mixed feelings about Biden, right? Like, because he appointed Lena on and a bunch of other things. I was like, this guy's, hasn't been as nearly as bad as anyone else I've seen. But a lot of the things that he's done, I really have not liked. But when the entire Democratic Party decided they want to get rid of him, I'm like, that's my guy.
Yeah. See, my thing is like, he was so pro, payer industry, everything else for the longest time. And I really didn't like Biden. And then he comes in and he appoints Lena Khan, and the FTC starts fucking shit up. And I'm like, oh my God, I would elect a stick right now to keep her there. We love you, Lena. Oh, look, Basil's on. He came on. I guess there is a time difference, even though I said Eastern Standard Time.
Hi, Basil.
Hey, you're very late. We got 5 minutes till we wrap up, but I'm glad you're here.
No, sorry, I didn't see the invite come through on Twitter, and so I didn't know.
I sent it via email.
You
Did
did?
you filter me? Did you big dog me? Everyone always big dogging me.
From your first email, I filtered you out. Absolutely. No, I'm sorry. But it looks like you guys were having a good chat anyways. So.
Oh, it's been fantastic. I'm not used to being the dumbest person in the room, so this has been really cool for me. Say hello to our 1,372 viewers.
Oh my gosh.
Introduce yourself.
Hello,
Basil.
everybody.
Yeah.
My
It's
name
been
is
a good
Basil.
live episode.
In
Yeah,
the
go
last 5 minutes, tell us what you think about the FTC
Yeah.
report
Oh gosh.
or the FTC, if that's easier.
I'm gonna ignore how embarrassed I am and just dive right in. So we'll just do that. Hi everybody. My name is Basil. I am an antitrust attorney down in Texas. I work with farmers and small businesses on advocacy for good anti-monopoly policy, and I do lawsuits, class actions for deceptive practices, fair trade, unfair trade practices, stuff like that. So yeah, I thought, you know, I'm not a healthcare person, so I don't have, you know,
Dude, that don't matter. I like your shit, so I wanted you to come on.
Well, I think
it don't matter.
I think what I can bring to the table is a little bit of a historical perspective, which I'm sure Matt can also do. But I think, you know, something that I have had a chance to dig into is like the FTC's investigation and reports from like the 1940s and 50s and 60s, the sort of heyday of the agency. And sort of reading through this report reminded me of that because it named names. It was unafraid to sort of, you know, come to a conclusion about what's going on, and it was written so that it can inform the public and inform Congress, and not just, you know, to be sort of a you know, something, a big report that gets put on the shelf by bureaucrats and industry, you know, people. So I thought that was really that's what I thought was really interesting about the report, and I really appreciated it. And
it was awesome. They put their dick on the table. It was really cool. Like, it was full on like, all right, here we go. And you posted like the historical like FTC stuff. I read through that, and they did not give a fuck back then. Like, they full on was just like, no, these people are terrible. Fuck them. They're awful. Like, that was really cool. And it feels like that's happening in a very kind of more diplomatic way now, but they are definitely going at them.
Yeah. I you know, I was like a sort of like a good example of sort of that kind of attitude. Actually, from before the 1940s, from the 1920s, there was a big investigation into meat packers.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's still a battle now. You do that.
Yeah, that's what I deal with most of the time. And yeah, and the you know, the FTC was not afraid to, like, first of all, say that monopolization was happening. Second of all, you know, explain the consequences of the conduct that was being engaged in, and also be very frank about the, you know, ethics or lack thereof of the people that they were facing up against and investigating. You know, that's not necessarily what's happening here. Although, you know, Chair Khan was very forthright in saying some of those PBMs are not responding, and it's not lawful, and we won't hesitate to go after them for it.
Yes, Queen Khan laid it down. She definitely did.
Yeah, as always.
As always. Now, while I have you two together, you've been going after meat packers, and we were discussing earlier about cross industry, and we've only got a little bit of time. I don't want to take up like too much of your all's time. We'll run over if you all really want to, but
I just got here,
as far as
so you should really. It wouldn't be.
We were talking about
not to. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. we were talking about cross industry, and Matt had a really good point, and this is what I brought up on Julie Bach's podcast earlier, is that we're seeing this in industries all across our entire economy. Of we have a ton of middlemen, we have a ton of pretty much monopolistic, oligopolistic, everyone. We have a ton of people that are just sitting there being middlemen, just sucking value out of the system, and it's like we've been set up this way, and we had judges packed and a lot of precedent there that kind of gives us some headwinds. What do you think about the current FTC and what's going on with it?
Is that
Yes.
Matt? Do you want to take a crack at that before I do?
Go for it. Go for it. You go for it. I've been talking.
So I mean, it's interesting you mentioned sort of the middleman aspect, because in sort of my work on the Packers and Stockyards Act, something that comes through loud and clear in the legislative history of that statute, which is supposed to protect livestock farmers against the depredations of meat packers, which are the middlemen between farmers and consumers. It was supposed to be, to protect against the sort of abuses of middlemen and the concentration of power and the bottlenecks that they create. And so, when we look at what's going on in the ag sector, in many ways, it's the same kind of fight. You have some set of entities in the middle that have sort of set themselves up to be able to collect rents from everybody around them. I think, to the extent that the FTC can go after PBMs, I imagine what we'll see is that a lot of, it's not the same practices. Obviously, it's not the same, it's not exactly the same thing going on in each industry. The mechanisms are different, but it's often like the same set of tools. And so if you go after PBMs for, say, discriminatory pricing or tying arrangements or exclusive deals or what have you, that can translate by analogy very well into other sectors and serve to revitalize sort of critical protections against abuse that can be used in other sectors too. So yeah, I'm really excited.
We got to get you hooked up with Brandy. She's in Texas too, and she's doing incredible work down there. Incredible. We can't even talk about half the work she's doing. It's incredible. You all would hit it off.
Yeah.
Here comes Greg again.
Back.
Greg is back. Welcome. Basil, I'm not sure if you've met the king of pharmacy, Greg Rybold. He is our actual official king. Yes, he is our official king
nice
for
to
a
meet
lot
you.
of reasons.
I thought you were the hokey king person.
Yeah, I make a lot of statements. No, I have a lordship that I got when I was blacked out drunk that just arrived, and the nickname stuck. But no, he is our true king. We bow down to Greg.
Yeah.
But you all, this is the shot I wanted forever. Is there any topics you all want to bring up? Because we are over an hour, and I will go 4 hours with you all if you let me, because this is like my dream team on here, and I'm very happy to have it, and I will consider it a lifetime achievement. My dad's very proud. Shout out, Dad. I know you're watching. Anything we want to go over that we haven't gone over yet?
I think we've covered a lot of ground, and
We have.
And really fascinating, and I appreciate.
And we officially hit the 1,500 viewers, which was what I was going for while I gave that speech. So it counted up, and we hit our 1,500 viewers.
Hey.
So everyone, thank you all, Matt, Greg, Basil, Monique, especially you, Monique, who grinds every day for PUT and does so much in the background and does not get the appreciation that she deserves a lot of times in the pharmacy community. You all are awesome. You all are some of my favorite people.
Monique, did you do that, the button PBM with the middle finger?
That was us, yes.
Mhm.
That was us.
Where do I get one of those?
Oh, I'll give you one.
Okay.
I'll mail you one.
Size would
It's
you
not a
like?
big deal.
How big do you want it to be? Would you like a tie version of that? We can arrange for that.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good idea. Well, at our Anti-Monopoly Summit next year, we totally want to give those out.
Dude,
Okay. Okay.
I have wanted to
Make
come
that
the past
happen.
2 years, and I've not been able to come. I'll
You're
be
not
able to do
invited.
this year.
You're not
Yes,
invited.
I am invited. Yes, I am. Sarasota told me I was invited. I'm
You're
coming.
not invited.
No, you all, thanks everyone that tuned in. Thank you all for being here. Everyone that's on here, stay for a second and let your shit upload because I've got to mix it later for the actual podcast. But hey, this has been PBM on the Rocks. Yeah, I can't license music, so you all get my music. Thanks, everybody.